They said he had already given everything to his country. The battlefield had taken his youth, his health, his sleep. It had stolen the light from his eyes, left him with scars no medal could ever cover. Yet when Ethan Carter walked into that grand ballroom on the night of the richest CEO's wedding, dragging his tired leg behind him and holding the calloused hand of his young daughter, no one in that glittering hall imagined that fate was about to thrust him into another battle, one he had not chosen, but one that would test his courage in ways even war never had. From the very first moment, Ethan's story was never about himself. It was about sacrifice, about a man who had already lost almost everything but clung fiercely to the one thing that kept him alive, his little girl, Lily. 7 years old, bright-eyed, and too innocent to understand why her father sometimes jolted awake at night drenched in sweat. She only knew that her daddy was her hero. And that though haunted by memories of blood and fire, he knew he could never let her down. That night, the grand ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and laughter. The elite of the city, powerful businessmen, politicians, celebrities had gathered to celebrate the wedding of Victor Harlow, a man whose empire stretched from real estate to finance. To the world, Victor was untouchable, rich, handsome, ruthless. Women wanted to be near him, men envied his power, and the media painted him as a self-made king. But Ethan, standing quietly at the back of the hall in his worn-out jacket, didn't belong here. He hadn't come for Victor. He hadn't come for the champagne or the glamour. He had come because of a promise. And because of a cry for help. Earlier that week, while fixing old furniture at the diner where he worked part-time, Ethan had overheard something that pierced him to his core. A young woman no older than 20 had been sobbing in the kitchen. Her name was Rosa, the maid who often served tables when the diner was short-staffed. Ethan had noticed her before, timid, quiet, with a softness in her eyes that reminded him of his late wife. But that day, she looked broken. "Please," Rosa had whispered into her phone, her voice trembling. "I can't do this. I'm pregnant. I don't want to sing at his wedding. Please don't make me broken bar." Ethan hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the desperation in her words struck him. Pregnant. Forced. Singing at a wedding she clearly wanted no part of. And worse, the man on the other end of the call had threatened her. He had barked something about debts, obligations, and shame if she refused. Ethan had seen fear before, but the kind that lived in Rosa's eyes that day was the kind that made his chest tighten. Later, when she had slipped out the back door, Ethan found her sitting alone, hands trembling over her stomach. He had sat beside her in silence until she whispered, "I don't know how to get out. They own me. If I don't do this, they'll destroy me." "Who?" Ethan had asked, his voice low but steady. "Victor Harlow's men," she said. "I used to work at one of his clubs. They said I owe them money. They said if I don't perform at his wedding, they'll broken bar, they'll make sure I regret it. But I'm carrying a child. I can't bear to face that crowd, to stand there while everyone laughs." While her voice broke. Ethan didn't have answers then. But as a soldier, one thing had been drilled into him: never leave someone behind. He had failed on Sia on the battlefield, when his closest friend had bled out in his arms. He had failed again when his wife died in childbirth because he couldn't get her to the hospital in time. He wasn't going to fail this young woman. Not now. So, when the day of the wedding came, Ethan showed up. He didn't have an invitation. He didn't have a plan. All he had was the conviction burning in his chest and the small hand of his daughter clutching his. Inside the ballroom, Rosa stood on the stage, her figure dwarfed by the glittering lights. Her dress was plain compared to the lavish gown swirling around her. Her hands shook as she gripped the microphone. The music began, and her voice, soft, trembling, floated into the air. The crowd barely noticed. They were too busy laughing, clinking glasses, praising the groom. But Ethan noticed. He noticed the way her eyes darted to the shadows at the side of the stage where two men in black suits stood, arms crossed, watching her like hawks. He also noticed the way Victor Harlow sat smugly at the front table, his new bride beside him in a gown that looked more like a contract than a choice. She smiled, but her eyes were empty, as if she too were trapped. Lily tugged at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, why is the lady crying while she sings?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Because she doesn't want to be here. Because she's being forced. Because men like Victor think they can buy anything, even dignity." The song ended, and the room erupted in half-hearted applause. Rosa bowed her head, tears streaking her cheeks. The men in black gestured for her to step down, but Ethan moved before she could. With steady strides, he walked through the crowd. Some guests turned, frowning at the sight of the limping veteran in his worn jacket. He reached the stage, and in a voice that carried the authority of a man who had once commanded soldiers, he said, "She's not singing another note." The room fell silent. Victor Harlow rose slowly from his seat, his lips curling into a cold smile. "And who," he drawled, "do you think you are?" Ethan met his gaze, unflinching. "A father. A soldier. A man who won't let you use her like this." Gasps rippled through the hall. Rosa froze, staring at him as if he had just stepped between her and a firing squad. The men in black moved forward, but Ethan's hand went instinctively to his side, where his weapon once hung in battle. He had nothing now but his fists, yet his stance alone stopped them for a heartbeat. "Dad, you broken bar," Lily whispered, clutching his hand tighter. Victor's smile widened. "Interesting. A crippled veteran and his daughter, crashing my wedding to play hero. Tell me, how do you plan to walk out of here alive?" The lights, the stairs, the tension, it all closed in. Ethan knew he was outnumbered. But war had taught him something Victor Harlow would never understand: courage isn't the absence of fear. It's standing tall even when your knees tremble. And so, in that glittering hall, Ethan Carter made a choice that would shock everyone and change the course of their lives forever. He pulled Rosa behind him and said, loud enough for the entire hall to hear, "She's under my protection now. If you want to hurt her, you'll have to go through me." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests whispered, guards advanced, and Victor's cold laughter echoed like a death sentence. Rosa clung to Ethan's arm, trembling. Lily hid behind her father, her eyes wide with both fear and pride. And in that charged moment, no Onia, not even Ethana, knew how far Victor Harlow was willing to go to keep his empire unchallenged. But one thing was certain: this was only the beginning. The silence in the ballroom lasted only a second, but to Ethan, it stretched like an eternity. He stood firm, Rosa trembling behind him, Lily clutching his hand with all the strength her little body could muster. Every eye in the hall was fixed on them, stunned that a man who clearly didn't belong in that glittering world had dared to defy Victor Harlow in public. The chandeliers glittered like sharp daggers above them, casting cold light on faces that expected to see Ethan broken within moments. Victor finally moved, his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor as he stepped closer, his men following like shadows. His smirk was practiced, rehearsed for boardrooms and negotiations, but behind it burned something raw and dangerous. "You've made a very bold choice," he said, voice smooth like silk dipped in poison. "But boldness without power, broken bar, is suicide." Ethan didn't flinch. His voice was calm, steady. "I've faced worse men than you, Victor. Men who thought they could crush the innocent just because they had money, weapons, or an army. They're all gone now. And I'm still here." The words cut through the silence, striking something in Rosa's heart. She looked at him as if seeing him for the first time be not just a worn-out veteran, but a man whose soul refused to bend. Tears welled in her eyes, but not from fear this time. From hope. The crowd, however, was restless. Some whispered in excitement, others in fear. The bride, sitting beside Victor's empty chair, lowered her gaze to her lap, hiding something no one noticed: the bruises on her wrist, half concealed by her diamond bracelets. Ethan's eyes caught it, and for a fleeting moment, he understood. Rosa wasn't the only one trapped in Victor's golden cage. Victor signaled to his men. "Get them out of here." Quietly. 2 guards advanced. Ethan shifted his stance, ready to fight though he knew he was outnumbered. But before the guards could reach them, Rosa suddenly stepped forward, her voice trembling but loud enough for all to hear. "Victor Harlow is a liar." The room gasped. The bride's head snapped up, eyes wide. The guests murmured in confusion. Rosa's hands shook as she clutched her stomach, but her voice grew stronger. He isn't just forcing me to sing. He owns clubs where women are trapped, forced to work against their will, their debts never paid. He tells the world he's respectable, but he destroys lives." Her confession was like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples of shock spread through the room. Journalists who had been invited to cover the glamorous wedding fumbled for their phones, recording every word. Victor's face twisted, the mask of charm shattering into raw fury. "Enough!" he roared, lunging forward. But Ethan moved faster. With one swift motion, he stepped between Victor and Rosa, his fist slamming into the CEO's chest with the force of years of training and rage. Victor stumbled back, crashing into his lavish wedding table. Glass shattered, champagne spilled, and chaos erupted. "Run!" Ethan barked, grabbing Rosa's hand with one and Lily's with the other. They bolted through the crowd as screams filled the hall. Some guests moved aside, others tried to block them, confused and panicked. The guards gave chase, but Ethan's soldier instincts kicked in. Every step, every turn, he calculated like he was back in combat, dodging bullets instead of crystal chandeliers. They burst through the side doors into a long hallway. Behind them, Victor's voice bellowed, "Don't let them leave this building alive." The chase was on. Ethan's limp slowed him, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He knew he couldn't outrun trained men forever. They needed a plan. He glanced around, spotting a service corridor leading to the kitchens. "This way," he hissed. They darted inside, weaving between cooks who screamed in surprise. Rosa clutched her stomach, gasping for air, but she didn't stop. Lily's tiny legs struggled to keep up, but she held tight to her father's hand, trusting him completely. They burst out into the alley behind the hotel, the night air cold and sharp. For a brief moment, they thought they were free until headlights flared at the end of the alley. A black SUV screeched to a stop, blocking their path. More of Victor's men spilled out. Trapped. Ethan shoved Rosa and Lily behind him. His fists clenched, his body tense. He had no weapon, no backup, but he had faced death before. If this was the moment, he would go down protecting them. Then, suddenly sirens. Red and blue lights flashed as police cars swarmed the alley. The guards froze, cursing under their breath. From the chaos behind them, several journalists appeared, cameras rolling, shouting questions. "Victor Harlow, what do you say about the allegations? Is it true you force women into your clubs? Why was a pregnant maid singing at your wedding?"